There are two cups set upside down on a table. Food is hidden under one of them. A researcher walks in, makes eye contact with the animal in the room, and points to the right cup. Just points. Your dog would get it right. Almost every time. The chimpanzee in the next room. The one that shares 98% of its DNA with us. The one researchers had spent decades training and testing and studying from every angle. Fails that task. It isn't a lack of intelligence or attention. Something in the way we communicate, this specific signal that passes between a person and a dog, doesn't translate to them the way it translates to your dog. I've turned that over a lot since I first read about it. Not abstractly. I thought about it watching Noodle, my chihuahua. He's 8. Pick out which of my two closed fists had a treat in it, even when I held them both exactly the same way. He wasn't smelling it. He was watching me. Watching my face for something I'm not even aware I'm giving. There is something in your dog that is organized around you. Not just around food or comfort. Around you. Your face, your voice, your presence in a room, in a way that 3 separate labs, using 3 completely different tools, have spent years trying to understand. Today, we're going to follow those 3 labs from the beginning. And by the time we get to the last one, you may look at your dog a little differently than you did this morning. To understand why any of this had to be proven, you have to understand what scientists were assuming before anyone thought to look. For most of the 20th century, animal cognition research followed a sensible principle. Intelligence scales with evolutionary closeness to humans. Chimpanzees share the overwhelming majority of our genetic code. They'd been observed using tools, solving multi-step problems, demonstrating something close to theory of mind in controlled settings. The research attention followed that logic. Dogs were in the background. Companions, workers, beloved, but not serious subjects for the kind of social cognition work happening in primate labs. The working assumption, usually unstated, was that a dog probably wasn't going to outperform a chimpanzee at anything requiring a read of another mind. I think most of us who grew up with dogs had the same assumption, honestly. We love them, we talk to them, but if you'd asked us to bet, most of us would have said, chimps are probably smarter at the things that count. What the research would show is that the assumption wasn't wrong, because dogs are smarter than chimpanzees in any general sense. They're not. It was wrong because the kind of intelligence needed to read a human being isn't general at all. It's targeted. It's narrow. And somehow, across roughly 15,000 years of dogs living alongside us, something in that direction got selected for, sharpened and passed down, until it became a capacity dogs are born with before anyone has taught them anything. The graduate student who first documented this wasn't exactly a dog researcher. He just had a hunch and a dog at home. His name is Brian Hare. In the late 1990s, he was a graduate student at Harvard, working in close collaboration with Michael Tomasello's group at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany. Tomasello's lab was one of the leading environments in the world for studying social cognition in great apes, how chimpanzees track attention, read gestures, understand what another being intends. Hare was involved in that work. And the chimpanzees, on the pointing task, were not performing the way you'd hope, the way Hare has described it. One evening, he started wondering whether his own dog could do what the chimps couldn't. Not a research question yet, just a thought that followed him home. He tried it in his kitchen, 2 cups, a pointed finger, and his dog got it right. He brought the question back to the lab. What followed was careful, controlled work. Dogs of different breeds, different ages, different training histories came in and were given the task, and alongside them, a critical comparison group, wolves. Not wild wolves, wolves raised by humans from birth, socialized to people, comfortable around the lab environment. The experiment was designed to answer a very specific question. Is the pointing ability something that any animal exposed to people would develop, or is it something specific to dogs? The results, published in 2002 in the journal Science, were unambiguous. Dogs followed the human pointing gesture far more reliably than chimpanzees, And the wolves, even the wolves raised alongside people, comfortable with the researchers, with no particular reason to be anxious or distracted, performed more like the chimps than like the dogs. The ability wasn't about practice or how much time an animal had spent around people. The wolves had all of that. They still didn't read the gesture the way your dog does. And then there were the puppies. Young dogs with minimal training, barely familiar with the world in any direction, and those puppies could still follow the point. Not perfectly, but reliably above chance. Creatures that had barely learned their way around a house were already looking where a human indicated, as if the communication were built into them before they had a chance to learn it. Because it was. The conclusion from that 2002 paper was that this is not an acquired skill. It's a trait shaped entirely by our shared history. Brian Hare later went on to found the Duke Canine Cognition Center, one of the premier institutions in the world for this kind of work. But that original finding holds. Now, I'm not a researcher, but I can tell you what that finding felt like the first time I really sat with it. It wasn't just that dogs are clever, it's that the thing they are clever about is us, specifically us, and that the study, as strong as it is, could still only measure what a dog does when it looks at a person. It couldn't tell you what the dog feels. For that question, science needed a completely different kind of tool. In 2015, a team of researchers at a veterinary university in Japan published a paper in the same journal, Science, that approached the question from a different direction entirely. They weren't studying what dogs do when they look at us, they were studying what happens inside a dog and inside a person during the moments when they look at each other. The team was led by Miho Nagasawa at Azabu University. The molecule they were measuring was oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, which is a reductive name for something worth understanding. Oxytocin is what rises between a mother and her newborn during eye contact. It's part of the biological mechanism of attachment. It makes you want to stay close, to look again, to touch. It isn't a metaphor for connection. It is a real chemical in a real bloodstream, and it changes behavior in ways that can be measured. Here's what Nagasawa's team found. Dog and owner pairs came into a room. Some pairs were allowed to interact naturally, talking, touching, making eye contact when it happened. Others were more limited in what they could do. Before and after, oxytocin was measured in the urine of both the person and the dog. In the pairs that spent the most time looking at each other, really making eye contact, oxytocin rose. Not just in the person, in your dog, and then it looped. Higher oxytocin in the dog led to more gazing. More gazing raised oxytocin in both. A feedback loop, the same biological mechanism that bonds a human mother to her child, running between two different species. Between you and the animal looking up from across the room. Now, the obvious objection is the one the Hare study already faced. Maybe it's just familiarity. Maybe any animal raised alongside people would show a similar hormonal response to human presence. Maybe wolves raised by humans would do the same thing. Nagasawa's team ran that experiment. Wolf and human pairs were tested. Wolves raised by people, comfortable with people, living with people. And the loop did not run the same way. The oxytocin gaze cycle that emerged reliably in dog and owner pairs simply was not there in the wolves. Familiarity doesn't explain it. They had a lifetime of human contact, yet the cycle never fired. What dogs carry, this specific mutual chemistry, is entirely their own. Noodle does this thing where he'll stop whatever he's doing, mid-chew, sometimes, and just look at me. Calm, direct, unhurried, for longer than you'd expect a small dog to hold a gaze. I used to think he wanted something. I used to think he was checking in, watching my patterns, reading whether I was about to move. Nagasawa's paper tells me there may be something else happening in that moment. A loop running in his biology and mine, older than either of us by a long stretch. The science can tell me what's happening in that moment. It can't tell me what it means to be on the receiving end of it. I've stopped trying to find the right words for that. But science did have one more tool to look at it. Gregory Burns, a neuroscientist at Emory University, spent years training dogs, voluntarily, without sedation, free to leave at any point, to hold still inside an MRI scanner. His question was almost disarmingly direct. What does a dog's brain physically respond to? He presented each dog with 5 categories of scent: their own scent, an unfamiliar dog scent, a familiar dog scent, an unfamiliar person's scent, and the scent of their owner. He was tracking activation in the caudate nucleus, the region of the brain associated with reward and anticipation, the part that responds when something good is approaching. Among all 5 conditions, the owner's scent produced the strongest and most consistent caudate response. Not the other dogs. Not unfamiliar humans. The specific scent of the person who belonged to them. All of these findings point to the exact same shape. The bond your dog has with you is not simply behavioral conditioning. It lives in their chemistry and their brain. It isn't shared with wolves or chimpanzees or any other animal. Dogs are simply biologically built for this relationship. I keep thinking about Brian Hare going home one evening in the late 1990s and pointing at a cup in his kitchen, not running an experiment, just curious. And whatever his dog did in that moment sent him back to the lab the next morning with a question that turned out to be much larger than a pointed finger and a piece of food. The dog waiting for you right now. Maybe at the door. Maybe at the edge of wherever you're sitting is not simply conditioned to want your company. The evidence is simple. Your presence does something to your dog that nothing else quite does. Your face, your scent. The act of you looking at them and them looking back, it changes their chemistry. It activates something in their brain that was shaped for exactly this. That's not projection onto a small dog. That's just biology. I'd love to know, what's the specific moment you caught your dog watching you in a way you still can't quite explain? Leave it in the comments. I read every one, every single one. Until next time, give them a scratch behind the ears from me.